Hello, everybody. My name is Sayan Bhattacharya, and this is episode 2 of the Digital Mindmeld. In today's episode, we are going to explore how sunlight exactly affects us in various different ways and how much that is important to our daily health in this modern age. Like I mentioned before as well, that the Digital Mindmeld is not just about AI, but about a wide array of topics in science and technology, and psychology and philosophy. So, I want to apologize for this episode's fidelity because we had a certain kind of problem with our cameras and we had a corrupt file, but I can promise that we will keep up to this and make it up in our later episodes. Without further ado, then just enjoy the Digital Mindmeld podcast and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you.
I've noticed that every time in the summer, when it's sunny, I'm always like happy, joyful, and then I have a lot of energy as compared to winter. Have you experienced something similar before?
Well, of course, I've been living in Germany now for over 6 years. And I remember clearly about my first semester over here. It was a winter semester. And there was a time around like 10 days where nobody was there in this small little town where we
Mm-hmm.
live. And I was completely on my own, almost in a building, right? And that was like a first hand experience of something which is like I'm very lonely.
Yeah.
And what happened in conjunction with that was my suddenly my energy like levels dropped.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And this I couldn't understand at the beginning till I started just one day at Netto. I purchased a vitamin D supplement, and I just like a cold drinks, you
Yeah.
know. And I mean, I just didn't want it to drink Coca-Cola. I just wanted to drink something else,
Something else, like
right? So I
with a
mean,
lot of sugar in it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right, that's right. I mean that thing is kind of like a fizzy drink,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like those tablets you get, vitamin D, vitamin C
Yeah, kind of
tablets.
like I like calcium actually.
Right. So I saw that I felt significantly improved after I started being on those vitamin D
Mm.
tablets. That brings me to something,
Yeah. And
right?
what is it? What do you think?
The it's because of the fact that there is one thing that is naturally available, not just in Netto. It's not available in Netto,
Yes. And
and
what is that thing?
it's called sunlight, right?
Sunlight.
So sunlight apparently happens to be kind of like a very important aspect, right, of a life where we kind of want to approach health.
Mm-hmm.
And the story of this essentially goes back to the time of when the life came first into this planet. It was called as the Cambrian explosion.
Oh, and can you please explain to me because I don't actually know what that is.
Right. Like so what happened is, I mean, the Cambrian explosion happened actually right after life came into this planet,
Yeah.
right? So once life was there, it came first inside the ocean
Of course. Yeah.
in form of plant algae like
Yeah.
life. And then what happened suddenly, which a lot of people do not talk about in the science community, you find that there has been a significant amount of improvement in the diversity and the population of living beings,
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
right? The question now begs is why? So at this period of time, if you go back, right, or that exact X amount of million years back, right, you find that essentially the atmosphere was that time almost getting cleared up. The heat was getting up, and it because it was freezing before that,
Yeah. So
right?
Earth was before like very cold place as compared
Very
to
cold,
nowadays.
very cold. It has either been very cold or either been very hot. So it
Okay.
was not habitable.
And why was it so cold when we are on the third planet, like next to the sun?
That's very interesting. I mean, the reason also why I want to discuss with you about
Yeah.
this, is not exactly just to kind of get into the details of any astronomy or something like that, right? But I have a very particular intention, and I would say like motivation to
Yes.
address a particular aspect, because of course our podcast is to do a lot about AI,
Yes, of
right?
course. AI, the
So
future.
yes, yes, I mean we are not definitely going away from that.
Hmm.
The idea here is to be a bit more inclusive and try to realize that in a post AGI system, what kind of stuff are going to be of high commodity and high value in the
Okay,
society.
so that brings me back to sunlight.
Yeah,
You
yeah, yeah,
mentioned
yeah, yeah.
sunlight, so how is it gonna be of value in the post AGI, like you mentioned?
Right, right, right. So the idea is that if you go back, essentially, let me kind of phrase it from the Cambrian explosion. Let me tell you the story a little bit
Hmm.
then, okay? Because the story has to be presented in full form in order to make sense,
Okay.
right? So inside of the ocean, what happened is at this time, the Cambrian period, which is called, and then the sunlight used to penetrate the depths of the ocean floor,
Mm.
not the ocean floor, but I mean nearby. I
Yeah.
mean it could penetrate a lot, right? So even in modern day, the ocean floor is completely dark, by the way, pitch black dark,
Mhm.
right? So right, so what happened essentially is that it is due to the presence of uh, ultraviolet light, right, which essentially promoted the processes of these plants. And of course, we know that fairly well in our from our school time, called as photosynthesis.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's not really well understood. This is my understanding when I started reading about a book called by R.D. Lee called as the Mitochondria Manifesto.
I mean, you're right in the by saying that photosynthesis is like a really generic thing we know from school. All I know from photosynthesis is the fact that plants get food from that. Like
Right,
they can create chlorophyll, which is later used as food for them,
right.
and that can like help them maintain their green color and sustain life. But other than that, I have no idea what's behind
So,
photosynthesis.
so you were a part of the German system, right? In,
Yeah,
in, in the school system, and you had biology
I
as a
did have,
as
yeah,
a right, and you were taught up to this point, right?
yeah,
Anything else that you were mentioned about
not
photosynthesis?
really, not.
Like, have you like did was this into the discussion that what exactly chlorophyll is?
Not really.
Mm,
We spoke more about genetics as compared to
right,
photosynthesis. Yeah.
right, and this is not a sudden accident, by the way.
Mm.
It's very well organized, right? And we need to know why that is the situation. But for that, we have to first again go back to the Cambrian age a little bit. So what happened is that there was a huge amount of like diversity in increment in plant life, right? And slowly, what happened is that there was graduation of that life, and which is called as evolution, of course, and which finally turned these plants into more complex animals, right? Now, if you have ever seen in your lectures, right,
Hmm.
when you were in school about chlorophyll, right? So you will find that chlorophyll has a particular chemical structure, right, which is very, very similar to another structure in the human body.
Yeah.
And
And what is that structure you're speaking about?
yes, so that's very much common in blood tests.
Hmm.
And would you like to make a guess?
Let's say hemoglobin.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. That's correct. So, I'm guessing also the fact that for people like you and me who have dark pigmentation
Yeah.
on their skin, must actually be more in sunlight than compared to who have a fair complexion, right? Because of reasons which we are going to discuss exactly on this
Yeah.
podcast, right? But let me first show essentially the structure, right? And if you see the structure over here, right, you see a very simple change that made something. This was when I first learned about this. My mind was blown.
Yeah.
Okay, like whoa, whoa, whoa,
It's
what
very
the hell
smooth.
is happening?
Yeah.
You know. So in the left hand side, you see essentially that there is chlorophyll, and on the right hand side, you find that there is iron,
Hmm.
which is I mean hemoglobin over here, right? And observe this as a fact that the central atom in both of these molecules
Yeah.
are just changed and everything else is exactly the same.
That sounds crazy, actually. And
Yeah.
it's the central atom that changed?
Right. So there are, if you look into this, there are only 12 more, 11 more electrons that are making the change,
Okay.
right? From magnesium to iron,
Iron. Oh, that's
right?
and what if
Because
you
if you
know,
look
like,
into the periodic table, it comes like after 11, like exactly here,
yeah,
right? Iron is heavier than
yeah, of
magnesium,
course.
right? So this is present in a human being, this is present in plants,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, the person who actually motivated me, I think I should really kind of mention him first before going, is Dr. Jack Cruz.
Yeah.
And Dr. Jack Cruz is essentially a biosurgeon. He was based out of El Salvador. And his idea was essentially to kind of experiment, first of all, with a lot of questions that he had in his mind. And I somehow feel that his question, I felt a connection with him,
Yes.
right? And the reason is because he is spitting out truths after truths after truths, you know. And the reason why I mention it as truths is because all his information is in the public domain.
And is he backed by the scientific scientists?
Oh, he was cancelled long time back, actually.
And why was he cancelled?
Well, there's like he has his reasons, of course, and I kind of partially agree with him on all the stuff that he says. I mean, I kind of agree with him fully, if I may,
Yeah.
because of the fact that he was an outlier in the system. So, if we are going to definitely come back to chlorophyll and stuff. I mean, this was just
Yeah.
another tangent.
I
I
mean,
mean,
Dr. Jack Rose is a very interesting person
Jack
from what
Cruz
you're
is a
saying.
very, very, very interesting guy.
Yes.
I mean, he came up with the entire philosophy of good health in the modern world,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's based out of El Salvador, right? And he is also famous for bringing the first amendment in medical freedom, both
Yeah.
in U.S. and El Salvador,
That's great.
right?
Sounds good.
So that's progress to me. I mean, that's how I see it. And the man himself was, when I see like he's spitting truth after truth, and every idea that he was talking about was so complex,
Mm.
right? When I am unable to put my eyes off the screen,
So,
right?
from him, the main thing you gain was chlorophyll and hemoglobin, right? The difference between.
Well. Let's go back to this topic again. I mean, in
Yeah.
order to make the story complete,
Yeah.
right? So over time, what happened is that the chlorophyll atom molecule kind of evolved itself into complex life, right? Where the central atom, magnesium, was changed and iron was placed in that, right? And this brings to many interesting things. So the very fact that photosynthesis mean that you're taking light and converting that into energy,
Yeah.
the same process is actually going to happen when you and me go out in the sun, right? And just stand out there. We are actually producing energy.
Wow. So that kind of like explain why I feel more energetic under the sunlight as compared to darker rooms.
Absolutely, man. I mean, I'll tell you about my story here. I mean, like, I used to sleep at 5 in the morning when I was a student,
Yeah.
a grad student here,
And that's
right?
very bad, right?
Terrible. I mean, like, my life was upside down. I mean, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how I changed it. Like, it took suddenly I kind of came up with this idea that like this is enough, you know, and like
Yeah.
after many enoughs is enoughs, you finally come to that
Like the final
the
one. I don't
final
want
one.
to live this life anymore,
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, because it will put a severe amount of tax in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like every possible thing that can go wrong will go wrong.
Yeah. Because
Okay.
you don't have the right amount of energy to like go throughout. Like,
The whole game is about energy,
that's right.
right? Like you see me all day, all doing all these complex tasks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right. Yeah.
I'm probably drinking tea and everything and all, but it's like I'm full of energy all the
Yeah.
time,
All the time.
right?
That's what I've noticed. Yeah.
Right. So, and the main reason is like I do two things. One is sunlight,
Of course. Yeah.
and the other is exposure to cold.
How does that work? Because in the winter there's not that much sun. It's more like dark, cloudy. So how does cold help with energy level rising?
Now we have to come to the mitochondria,
Mm.
right? So you have definitely had some of the lectures in your
Yeah,
school.
yeah, yeah.
So did I when back in India, right? And I guess if you correct me if I'm wrong, like you just were talked about the fact that it's the powerhouse of the
Of the cell,
cell.
yeah, that's the only thing I know about the mitochondria right now.
Yes, and probably you know a little bit about ATP
Yeah.
molecules, right? But the intricate processes involved inside of the mitochondria it's just not exactly well taught, I think, you know.
Mm.
And the reasons were also kind of complex, I would say, because a lot of it is coming out of quantum biology.
Yeah. Which is like a new field in the
Kind
science
of,
community.
yes. I mean, I will tell you some research proving the fact that it's not completely new.
Mm.
Okay, but the research was not entertained earlier, maybe, yeah. And that is where Becker comes into the picture,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Becker was essentially the person who came up with the fact that like our bones, they essentially they don't heal but they regenerate,
Of course, yeah, that's true. I've
right?
seen that before, yeah.
Yes, and if you see by regenerate for the audience, I mean to say that it if you cut off a salamander's tail,
It's gonna grow back,
it's going to grow back,
of course.
right? And for a human being, by the way, only the tip of your finger
Can do that.
can grow back, but not the entire finger or anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the only thing you can grow back. Nails, of course, hair,
Yeah.
of course, right? So, bridging this idea, because everything is like I'm gonna come to a full circle when I finish the whole
Yeah.
thing, okay? Because it has to be presented in a full circle. That's what I realized after listening to Jack Cruz, because the same reason why sunlight matters is exactly the same reason how Bitcoin is an important entity right
Oh,
now.
okay. I don't
Yes,
really see the connection between both of them,
we,
but
we
you're
will
gonna explain,
definitely
yeah,
talk
for
about
sure.
this in much more great amount of detail
Yeah.
because I think that that's a very complex topic, and from my experience most people don't understand it.
Yeah, me personally, I have no idea
I,
about
I will say I'm
the
not gonna say
topic.
I'm the most like I mean I'm a scholar of it. I'm not, right. But what I can understand out of this is the utility,
Mm-hmm.
and let me tell you why I'm talking about this. Right, it's not because of this. You have to have a scholarliness in the particular topic in order to talk about this. But if you're using any form of technology, you're already an user,
That's right. Yeah.
right? Now you must have enough amount of knowledge to have us answered all the questions that are there in your mind in order to use that particular piece of technology,
Mm.
right? Otherwise you don't even know what you're doing exactly, right? So that is my area of curiosity. It's a more of a curiosity driven
Yeah.
rather than academic driven, yeah. So
Mm.
same goes for AI, by the way. I mean, if you want to build good AI, you must use good AI and have a good taste for these AI products.
Going back,
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
want to like know how the mitochondria relates to
Right,
the core
right,
because that's
right.
what's like the main question I have for you.
Now let's just like completely get into the meat of the
Yeah.
podcast, okay? So, which is the mitochondria, right? Now, the mitochondria is, of course, the powerhouse of the cell. There's
Of
nothing
course, yeah,
wrong
it is.
about that. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that's true.
perfectly true.
Yeah.
Yes. The only thing is essentially that, like, how this is where physics needs to be learned, right?
So you think there's a relationship between biology and physics?
I mean, everything at the end of the day is having some
That's
physics,
true.
right? But like this is where it gets very complex. Like where you define biology and physics. Like natural sciences, if you talk about that in the Royal Society,
Yep.
it kind of includes all the three things: physics, chemistry,
And biology,
biology,
yeah.
right, all together. But that's how we perceive it. In fact, biology was like a kind of an extended format of sciences, kind of, when physics being having a higher kind of a position
Mm-hmm.
in that way, right? Because we have essentially learned more about technology, which is coming from physics, than about biology,
Very true.
right? We don't know anything about biology, to be
But I
honest.
think the field of quantum biology you mentioned is gonna be like a very huge thing in the future. And
It's gonna bring another quantum leap.
that's right.
Definitely, man. I mean, definitely. From whatever little I understood out of it, and I'm going to talk about that right now. So there's something called as photo biomodulation.
What is that?
right? So modulation, the word modulation is quite also, I mean, used in communications engineering, by the way. When you have an antenna and you want to essentially send a wave from this one antenna to the other antenna, right, you modulate the wave, right? and and this modulation scheme, essentially the reason why you do that is kind of to change it into a higher frequency so that it can be transferred from one place to another in a more efficient manner, right? So now the idea is that over here, I mean, of course there is also more things, like if you have put it in a higher frequency,
Mm-hmm.
just coming here, because it might come full circle again, like how an antenna works, right? So the size of the antenna,
Yes.
right, is directly proportional to the inverse of frequency. So if you have high frequency, the size is going to get smaller,
Yeah. And if
which
you
is
have
good.
low frequency, then it's gonna get bigger.
Get bigger, right? You've seen those big large antennas,
Yeah.
right? Like how they kind of function. So they will operate in a frequency which is very different to the ones which we have in our phones,
Yeah.
right? Like we are right now working in 5G, right?
Yeah. Very true.
So and if you go into like the advancements of 5G, you have something coming up which is the millimeter wave, which is next, right? And we'll get into that. I mean, whether or not it, how, what kind of implications it might happen, because photobiomodulation, where I use the word photo, it immediately brings in electromagnetism,
Of course.
because light is nothing but an electromagnetic wave,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you know a thing or two about light, right, you can apply the same set of physics in how light will work once it kind of maintains contact with the human skin,
Hmm.
right? So what happens exactly is, if you look into the whole photosynthesis equation,
Yeah.
again, the chemical equation, right? And what happens there is that carbon dioxide and water kind of comes in presence of sunlight, and then you find glucose, right? And you find two free electrons. That's where the energy is coming from, by the
Mm-hmm.
way, right? So the idea here is that in photobiomodulation, with the advent of light being a parameter, essentially, you can completely change the processes of a human being, because the human being is extremely affected by light.
Yeah.
Why is that? It's due to the fact that our DNA, for instance, right? Like if you ever see this, right? Like cosmic rays causes cancer, by the way. If you're just, it might cause cancer immediately, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that happens is because if a piece of photon, which are particles in the light,
Yeah.
right, coming at the speed of light, right, in a higher frequency, which are, let's say, cosmic rays and stuff, yeah, once they make collision with the DNA,
Mm-hmm.
right, and if you see that the DNA is like an antenna, okay,
Yeah.
because the size of the antenna and the frequency of the light kind of matches, and hence it kind of can detect
Mm.
that light due to the high frequency, and if provided in high intensity, it might just break the structure of the DNA. And this is what cancer is once your
Oh.
structure is broken, because the DNA is like the code, what you have to do. Have you
Yeah.
wondered about this ever, that you when you have, let's say, a problem with your lungs,
Yeah.
and you're taking a particular pill, versus you have a headache and you're still taking a particular pill. How do you think that the pill knows that it's going to solve the headache, and how does it know that it's going to solve the
I
lungs?
always thought about white blood cells knowing what they're doing in my body, kind of.
Yeah, yeah,
And they just use the pill, whatever the pill is doing inside. I have no idea. But they just use what the pill is doing in order to solve the problem.
right.
Because the white blood cell is kind of like aware of what is happening inside
And
the
how do
body.
you think it is aware? Like, it's not like a human being like aware, right?
Yeah.
It is an auto. So this is the part, right? It's a machine. Every cell inside us is a machine, and it's an amazing machine. It's a quantum machine,
Yeah, it is.
because it's very small,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's full of water, by the way, right? Most of it. So the DNA essentially is the code. It's like if you have a hardware and then you put software into it. The
Hmm.
software tells you what to do essentially.
So the DNA is responsible of the pills doing the work they are doing whenever we have like
Oh, I
some
am not an
purpose.
expert in that. I don't want to
Okay.
get too much into detail, but it has something to do with it,
Okay.
definitely. But what I can tell you for sure is that if you put electromagnetic radiation
Yeah.
at some high intensity, it might break a DNA, right?
That sounds bad.
That definitely sounds bad, but the fact is that that is not in the range of ultraviolet to kind of visible light to infrared.
Hmm.
In fact, infrared is good for you.
Okay. And what is good about infrared for you?
Right. So that's where the tuning aspect comes into the picture. There is only a certain amount of bandwidth under which human beings can operate safely. Outside of that bandwidth, human beings cannot operate safely.
Mm.
Right? Because if the DNA breaks, the cells kind of gets the code that expand and expand and expand. Because sometimes the cell needs to get the code that we have expanded enough. Now just shut up and be there. Right? And cancer is nothing but abnormal growth.
Of course, yeah.
Right?
Multiplication of cells. Yeah.
Yes. So if I come back again to photobiomodulation, bio is about living
Biology,
beings,
yeah.
right? And modulation is some kind of parametric
Of
change,
course, yeah.
right? Being the light as a parameter. And I told you this that experimentally we have found this out that there are certain kind of lights, electromagnetic radiations, which if given to you at a certain intensity for a certain period of time, a very high chance is that it might cause cancer, and other ones essentially will kind of help you,
Hmm.
right, if given in the right manner.
Can you expand on that, please?
The answer to that is sunlight,
Okay, sunlight, yeah.
right? And why?
You mentioned the mitochondria before, so I think it has to do with the mitochondria.
Yes.
So the sunlight, like you mentioned, being on us, like sunlight rays on us, do something in our body that we are not aware of.
Yes. So exactly, like very similar to how photosynthesis happens in plants,
Mm-hmm.
it also happens within us and
Okay.
forms glucose. So the minute you
Oh,
essentially wake up and you see that like the light gives you an energy, a different kind of an energy. If you have slept well, of
yeah,
course. I mean,
of
if you
course.
haven't slept well, then you're gonna feel like shit anywhere you go, right? I mean, a good sleep is so much necessary. So after that, I mean, once you go out in the sun, you feel like you're having a certain amount of energy,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's because literally in your body glucose is being formed, right?
Yeah, glucose is
And
what gives us energy in a way.
yes,
That's what we survive on. Yeah.
yes, for day to days kind of thing, right? And but coming back to the idea that how this works, right? So this works, so you have to also understand a few things about light first. So light has two nature. It's a dual nature,
Yeah.
right? One is essentially the particle nature of light, and the other is the wave nature of light, right? And this is something that Einstein proved in his 1905 paper, essentially, or 1902, which he got the Nobel Prize, and that is about photoelectric effect.
Hmm.
That in on top of a metal, if you put any kind of electromagnetic radiation, including the visible light that we see, it immediately can make a certain kind of electron emission if the energy is greater than a certain threshold, right? And the threshold is something which is dependent on various metals, of course. But the thing that is important over here is that the frequency matters, the intensity doesn't. Okay?
Uh, you first spoke about antennas and frequency before. Does
Yes.
it have anything to do with that? Like, the higher the frequency, the smaller the size of the antenna, and the
Yeah.
lower the frequency, the higher the size of the antenna. Is it
That's
something?
a very good question. I mean, I'm unable to kind of get you back immediately with the full process, but that's a really really great question. That how does photoelectric effect
Yeah.
and the antenna essentially, I mean, the nature where in the antenna we are using the wave nature of light, right? I mean, it's not that we are using it, behaves in that
In that
manner,
manner, yeah.
right? It's not like we have a say
No,
in
it's kind
this.
of like a law in a way.
Yes, it's an empirical observation.
Yeah.
Maybe this will be a little more clear as I explain the wave nature, let's say over here, right? So now with these electrons, essentially, like, I mean, once you get that, so you can generate some format of energy. This is exactly how a solar cell works,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we are kind of solar cells,
That makes sense. Yeah.
right? So I mean, the solar cell is essentially the human cell in a way. Now, coming back to the Cambrian evolution and how exactly did complex life come in? Now, this is where melanin has to do with a lot of
Mm.
things.
I mean, melanin is like good for sunlight. Because of sunlight, that's why you have the dark pigmentation.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you
Yes.
think because of that dark pigmentation, you have the ability to absorb more sunlight rays as compared to?
Yes. So melanin has this exceptional quality that it has the capacity to kind of take in a lot of available electromagnetic radiation and make the best use of it,
Okay.
right? So, but again, I mean, you also need to be clear about this part that when I say that it can take all the amount of energy in the ecosystem,
Ecosystem,
surrounding
yeah.
ecosystem that it's living in, it also has to come with its, I would say, like its cost, which is the entropy,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Now, entropy in communications engineering, right, which I studied, was coming out of a very different kind of a definition versus how it is defined in physics,
Mm.
right? And then you also have, right, the essentially the much more philosophical kind of an understanding of entropy, right? I mean, it is clearly said in sciences that like you cannot break the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy is increasing inside of a open system, right? So the idea is that uh, entropy is nothing but essentially the amount of surprise that is present in the system. This is what Shannon kind of figured out,
Mm.
right? So what Shannon did is basically he wanted to have a coding scheme, right, which would be, I mean, useful for sending information from point A to point B, and on the basis of which one is more probable versus less probable. Like, let me give you an example that
Yeah.
would be better. You have four horses to bet on, okay? The first horse has a 50% probability of winning,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the second horse has a 20% probability of winning, right? The third horse, let's say, so you already have 70%, you
Yeah,
have 30 more
70%.
percent,
Yeah.
right? The third horse has 25%, and the fourth horse has 5%,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? Now, which one do you think that is going to be like giving you the has the potential to get the highest amount of um, money?
Well, if you bet on the one that's 5%, then you are gonna get the most amount of money
Yes.
because people are gonna bet on what they think has the higher probability to win the race.
The least probability to win, isn't it?
I mean, I'm gonna bet on the 5% because I think no one else is going to bet on that.
Exactly. That's right. That's what you wanted to say.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 yes. That's correct. That's correct because that's kind of extremely surprising.
But if you bet on the 5%, what are the chances that you win actually?
Oh, that's a different question,
Okay.
right? Because this is the analogy always has its limitations, right?
Yeah.
Because analogies kind of try to point somewhere,
Yeah.
yeah. And so the idea is that if you're actually going to do that, I mean, you're probably going to put your money on A,
Yeah.
maybe.
They like 50%. That's very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what happens is that, like, when you encode an information, right? If you have to put a number of bits, like a bits you have in your memory, computer memory. It's the same thing,
Yeah.
right? Binary. Now, these bits essentially are converted into these high frequency with using modulation techniques, like I mentioned, right? In order to transfer it from point A to point B. So, more bits means more energy, less bits means less energy,
Yeah.
right? Now, the highest amount of bits that I should give is the one which occurs the least amount of time,
Mm.
right?
I see. So that relates to the analogy you brought. I see. Yeah.
Right? So that is the way Shannon came up with his idea, in his information theory paper, right? I think 1946. Then it's an amazing paper. Everybody should read this paper, right? And what he mentioned in his paper is that everything can be broken down into two questions: yes or no, right? So that is exactly where the bit thing comes into the picture.
What about yes and no? Like the quantum
Well,
physics kind of, like people in the quantum field speak of that.
that makes no
Both
sense.
being possible.
Yeah, both being possible doesn't make sense actually,
Really? What
right?
about the Schrödinger cat
Let's
experiments?
take one thing at a time,
Yeah.
right? Let's go one at a time.
Okay, for sure.
All right. So before, I mean, I go back, I mean, we were kind of like touching into the photoelectric effect
Yeah,
part, right?
you are.
And how that photobiomodulation kind of has its effect in the cells. So it's kind of like you understand that there are aspects in the mitochondria, right, which are absorbent to sunlight, and with the advent of sunlight, it releases these free electrons, which are
Mhm.
giving you this energy,
Yeah.
right? And more than that, I mean, melanin is another catalyst kind of a thing, right, which comes into you, which helps you absorb all the resources that
Mhm.
you have, which you ideally want as a
Of
living
course,
creature.
yeah.
Like, even if you think of, let's say, an entity which is a lizard right over here, what it wants is to emphasize the maximization of the amount of energy that it has in its surroundings, right?
That's right.
So if it can eat one particular insect, and a lizard can kind of live up to 3 months with one insect, maybe, right? Because they can hibernate,
Oh.
right?
So it's similar to a snake, kind of.
Yeah. I'm not talking of every lizard, of
Yeah.
course. I'm just telling you, like, yeah. And that way, what happens is that they're taking up that energy, right, into their own system, and that would come at a cost,
Really? Isn't all
because
energy good energy?
no. Now you have to think temporally, not for 1 or 2 years. Think of millions of years, right?
Mhm.
Once your timeline is stretched to millions of years, you compound this effect day after day, and think how evolution will essentially happen. So evolution, according to Darwin,
Mhm.
right, which is not a very complete theory, if you ask me, right, because of many reasons which we can go another day. So when you see essentially that, like, you are getting a certain amount of energy resources, which is, of course, has a cap, right, and you want to do something with that, right? Like, for instance, there a lot of the ideas come where, like, it's all random. It's all, that's what kind of what the neo-Darwinists say. Darwin might not agree with neo-Darwinists, by the way, if
Yes.
if he was alive. So,
Okay.
uh, I mean, the idea is that there has to be selection amongst certain things. Example: give a polar bear gave birth to, for instance, a red bear. Now, what will happen is that the red bear won't make it, because in the Antarctics, right? I mean, in the they all live in very snow-peaked kind of areas, right? And in the poles, what is required is that you, if you have the white color, you can camouflage with the snow,
With
so
the snow,
nobody
yeah.
can detect you. But if you are already noticed, then the chances of you getting your food is extremely low. So that way, what happens is that nature will cut off that possibility after making a random choice at
Okay.
first, right? But there's a counter of, like, there's no counter, but there are more variables in this equation. It's a multivariate kind of a situation, right? And those variables are very, very important. So when you are getting the amount of energy into you, you will have to channel that energy into growth and development of certain aspects of the body,
Mhm.
compounded over millions of years, I'm saying here, not like one lifetime.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, even though in one lifetime you can have like the most solid six-pack abs that you want, right? So a gorilla, for instance, had to optimize itself in order to make its skin very tough.
Mhm.
Now we didn't do that.
Of course, but we developed something else,
We developed something else.
which is the brain. Or
Yes. So first we developed a very healthy immune system,
okay.
because we understood this, that we have to move from point A to point B, right? And in order to do that, we kind of must have the ability to kind of live in novel environments, because the microbiome of that environment is completely different. I mean, a lot of animals, right? Like if you kind of put them into different places, they won't survive. A good example, of course, is the Amazon, right? They are so powerful creatures in the Amazon,
Yeah,
but if you take them out of the
they
Amazon,
won't survive. They're gonna die.
exactly. So it doesn't matter if you're just powerful.
So you need a good immune system in order to survive everywhere.
That's
And they even could
correct.
like adapt to every type of temperature, for example.
Yes, yes. And also the bacteria, of
Yeah.
course, right? Because that you maintain a symbiosis with bacteria. So
So going back to the mitochondria and hemoglobin,
yeah,
I never really got the connection between both of them and how the mitochondria and the hemoglobin and how both of
right,
them.
right. I mean, I think let me first finish the tangent
Okay.
on the whole. Yeah, correct. So first, let me just finish the little bit of this tangent that we were on, which is the amount of energy,
Yeah.
right, and how does can be utilized over millions of years, right? And so if you have X amount of energy, the gorilla also has X amount of energy, right? And the fact that you have to utilize it in a certain direction for a long term commitment, so does the gorilla does it for
Mhm.
a long term commitment, right? And there is also one thing more on top of this, which is sexual selection. We can probably discuss that in great amount of detail later,
Later, yeah.
but I want to first like address back you in the point where we just left, which was the mitochondria,
Yeah.
right? And we were speaking about light, because all of this is
Has to
exactly,
do with light.
yes, exactly. So physics of the system we were kind of trying to realize, right? So all of these are quantum processes, right? So the first thing you do you know what is a semiconductor?
A semiconductor, something that can conduct half of electricity. I don't know.
No,
No,
no, no,
what is
no,
it?
no. I mean, this is like if you, I mean, everybody who has studied electronics,
Yeah.
or some form of physics, like would be knowing, compared to, like, you are coming from more of a non-tech kind of
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
background in the over here. So, um, what were we talking about?
The semiconductor.
Right. So a semiconductor is something where if you put light into it, it also releases light,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all of your systems are actually semiconductors over here. What you're holding over here inside the chip is made of silicon, which is a semiconductor,
Semiconductor. Okay.
right? We have carbon is also a semiconductor, right? So semiconductors are extremely important, okay? And that is because it can absorb a certain amount of light, and it can make some form of electricity, like electrical energy, out of that, right? So that's broadly speaking, right? Which is exactly how we kind of get the energy. And the other thing that is important, which I wanted to mention, is the mitochondria. Now it will make full circle.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Yes. So the mitochondria, the size of the mitochondria, is dependent on how much sunlight and ultraviolet light you're getting exposure to.
Okay.
You have always heard about this, that ultraviolet light causes cancer, and
Yeah.
you get all these sunscreens in the
In the
stuff, right?
supermarket, yeah.
So you don't need them, by the way.
Really? Isn't that a
Yes.
bit controversial?
Well, we kind of, whatever documentation which we can also assign in the details of this video, right? They kind of are in the public domain.
And what about people that have like no melanin? Do they need sunscreen or do they not need sunscreen?
If they do not have melanin, okay, by the way, so I am not a medical doctor,
Yeah.
guys, right? So don't take this as medical advice. All I'm asking to do is get out in the more in the sun, right? And that's it. That's just about it, right? So don't take this as medical advice. Yeah, because I don't want to wake up tomorrow and open my post box and find a lawsuit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right.
So
I never wore my sunscreen because of you, and then you're like, I get cancer. Yeah.
yes. So, I mean, if you are living under an ozone hole, then you need to wear it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if not, then you
Yeah,
can.
I mean, the healthy amount of exposure that we have in Germany, man, I mean, it's completely healthy. Okay.
The sunlight, you mean?
Yes,
Hmm.
according to many literature, of course, right? And the literature is like coming more for full, making it full story, which is why I'm finding that more reliable, right?
Hmm.
So the idea here is that the size of the mitochondria is dependent on the amount of sunlight you get every day,
So
right?
the more sunlight you get, the more the size of the mitochondria increases, and the more
Exactly.
glucose you produce in a way, and then you have more energy. And that's why I was feeling like in summer I had a lot of energy.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. That's understandable. Yeah.
Yes. It happens over a long period of time, of course. Like if you are not really getting the sun for a long period of time, and also it produces your vitamin D,
Yeah,
right?
like natural vitamin G. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Which is why I was feeling not so well. And I mean, that really compounded over my graduate school. I mean, I always used to be in a very strange state of consciousness during that time because if you don't get the sunlight, man, I mean, the devil really gets into you,
Yeah. And
you know?
since when have you implemented like sunbathing in your day-to-day life?
So that is another interesting question, partly personal too. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll reveal a bit of it. So I took a 64-day challenge,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like I mentioned, that this was the last enough of the all the enough is
Yeah, like
enoughs.
nah, this time I have to like really focus. And then yeah.
That's correct, and the challenge was very important for me for 64 days because I needed to prove to myself that I can do this, right? So as a result of this challenge, I was kind of like waking up at around 3:34 in the morning every day.
Which is better than sleeping at 5. Yeah, I think.
Exactly. I mean, I'm already awoke compared to when I was not
Yeah, not
asleep,
asleep. Yeah.
right? So and I used to sleep by 9:30,
Mm.
right? My even now, I mean, I finish my dinner and everything by 6:30,
Mm.
right? And after that, I just drink tea, and if I feel some days, I snack a little bit.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, as we were speaking, the mitochondrial size, right? Uh, this is super important, man, because as we kind of get into the place where AI is going to take up more and more of the unsophisticated work, the more boring kind of
Yeah, the
work,
labor type of work. Yeah.
right? It also has the potential to get you completely hooked. It already did, by the way. It's not like it has the potential, it's already that way it's running. Anyone who is into social media knows that they spend more time than they think of spending.
That's right. It's like an addiction, kind of.
It's a pure addiction, and the fact is that these people, whoever are in the top tier, right? Google, Facebook, Meta, I mean, um, they have perfected this algorithm on how to keep you hooked.
Of
So
course.
you are never gonna win that,
Yeah.
right? This is the first thing of which I tell to myself. I cannot beat those guys.
Well, I think if I'm gonna use it like to spend time, why not spend time making money with it, anyways, kind of. So let me
Mhm.
use the apps, but use it to make money in
that's
a way.
that's your businessman
Yeah.
talking, right? And that's correct. I mean it's not like we don't have to completely keep it aside and suddenly like put a tinfoil hat in our heads and just live like that. That's really not the
No,
idea here.
that's not the idea.
You know, I mean, I know that audiences are going to be quite have a diversity of opinions on the topics that we are speaking, but the fact is that there should be this out there so that they kind of are pushed in order to see into the
Hmm.
references how exactly this whatever I'm saying, how much of it is actually real.
I mean, it sounds very logical. You know, everything you said is to me like straightforward, and
Well,
then back it
it's
with
not about
research.
logical, right? It's about the way nature works,
Hmm.
right? The way physics works, actually, right? So we cannot really talk about like why it works the way it works. It just works that way. And my if to my benefit, if I can use the best out of it, I'm gonna be living longer, have a better life, right? And build better AIs
Hmm.
and essentially make music, make art, man. I mean, that's what I want to do.
Yeah. So we are speaking about light, mitochondria, but then we are speaking about AI and technology. Don't you think that staying in front of the computer or the phone every time, exposed to blue light, is dangerous
Yes,
for us, for the
very
health?
much. Very much. That's a very good point. Now, the fact is, essentially, it works in this way. And I mean, I learned a lot of this from the Huberman Lab podcast, whom Dr. Cruz absolutely hates.
They are like both sides of a coin
I
with it.
mean, not really, again, but I mean, Huberman is like, I mean, I think that like he has a very interesting way to put the stuff,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, he goes on for 2 hours speaking a certain way of things. And of course, he comes from a much more centralized part
Yeah,
of
but
medicine,
yeah.
right? He's from Stanford. And if you know a thing or two about Stanford, which we are going to get into later
Hmm.
when we talk about Bitcoin, right? There is something to do with it. And uh, like, for instance, if you get your exposure to light in the morning, that is very good. But you have to first ask the question why,
Why? I
right?
mean, because you mentioned the mitochondria, does it have
No, that was related to the question that you first brought up, which
yeah,
was your low energy question,
yeah.
right? But now I'm talking about things which can go even bad than low energy,
Mm.
right? Like I went to one of the extremes when I said about talked about cancer, right? But I mean, we are not generally, we are kind of safe, you can say, in the modern day, the way it is. Yeah. So I mean, in the world wars, there was a video game. So there was no video game. There was a real game,
Yeah,
a board game, which was later banned, of course, which kind of was about making an atomic reactor, and it had radioactive materials.
really.
Yes,
Damn.
yes, and a
Sounds.
lot of copies were sold, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I mean, people were like very different nowadays. Like, you if you think everything in the lens of today, you will actually be shocked. Like at the time of Freud, if I just go and say that, hey, I'm not feeling so well, I'm feeling a bit like down and low or something, and he'll have some cocaine.
Really?
Yeah.
And when was that at the time?
At the time of Freud used to prescribe cocaine,
Damn, that sounds
right?
yeah.
So
And it have like any benefits to the people taking it?
I mean, cocaine is a drug,
It is a drug, yeah.
so it might be helpful for some situation, of course, but I don't know if it is, like, no psychologist or psychiatrist in today, I don't think in any country will prescribe you cocaine.
Yeah, no
Okay,
one because that sounds terrible in my opinion. But
right, but it wasn't at that age and time. Yeah.
mhm.
So with age and time, we kind of have a very interesting calibration to our morals,
Yeah,
right, and aesthetics, and all the avenues of human life, right? So coming back, like, I mean, when you are in the morning time, you're exposing yourself to light. The first thing that needs to be kind of, how do you know, by the way, what is light?
that's a good question.
Well, I
You
mean, how do you detect it?
you see it?
Exactly, you see it.
Yeah,
So your eyes, right?
yeah,
So your eyes are actually a direct part of the brain, by the way. The eyes are the brain, by the way, right? The brain has one set of neuron channels that comes here and follows the socket here, right? So it's brain. This is brain. I'm
hmm,
looking into your brain right now,
very true.
right? This is why people want to look into the eye, because you look into the brain of the person, what he's thinking when you look into the eye. And the minute the body gets the signal that I'm getting light, it immediately wants to wake everything up, right, and start in a functional mode, because I told you earlier that these are machines,
Yeah,
right? They
very true.
have to obey a certain kind of logic. This is like an orchestrator. It tells the entire brain that, hey, it's daytime, wake up, but you're watching Netflix at 1 in the night,
Hmm.
right? It's not going to be good for you.
So it's like a conflict in a way. You have to wake
Yes.
up, but you never rested enough in order to wake up at that time. Oh,
Come again?
like you have to wake up because of the light. That's what you're saying.
No,
Because
no, no. I'm saying you're awake
yeah,
at night watching Netflix, what is happening to your body is that your body thinks that it's daytime,
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not nighttime, it's daytime.
It's daytime.
And that means that the sleep quality will be disrupted because your body, most of your body cells think it's daytime. Now you're going to sleep after watching like the cliffhanger episode of your favorite series, right?
Yeah, criminal athlete carbon.
Yes, yes. So it's the sleep quality will definitely not be good, man. I mean, after I started sleeping from 9:30 10 onward, like I completely switched off the lights. Now that is peaceful sleep, really. After decades, I think I had that quality of
Because
sleep.
of what the melatonin,
Yes,
like complete darkness, is very good for sleep. Because the brain knows it's time
I-
to rest. As compared
yes.
to like when there's light, it wants everything to be up.
Right, right. So this is because, like, you again have to compound things over time. The whole electricity stuff is coming out for like 1.5 centuries only, right? Before that, it was all daytime and nighttime, right? And if you even, I'll give you a healthy example here, like very interesting example. The Egyptians, basically the pyramids, when the artifacts were found, essentially, right, the fossils and everything of the people from that period, it was found that the ones who were actually struggling to make the pyramid, right, had very large size mitochondria
Oh, that's a lot of energy.
compared to the elite class who was inside the pyramid in artificial light.
So you kind of are saying that the elite class knew that they had to provide the workers with a lot of energy.
No, they were like
Oh, okay. So what you mean is that the elite were inside and were not exposed to sunlight. So the size of the mitochondria was smaller as compared to those working outside.
and that resulted in many kind of unhealthy lifestyles
Mm-hmm.
in the elites, diseases in the elites, whereas the person who is all day working under the sun
Yeah,
is strong and healthy,
interesting. Everything makes sense now. Yeah,
right?
it does.
So mitochondria size is important, man. I mean, as you can have any degrees, you can have no degrees,
Okay.
doesn't matter. It's physics. All is physics.
So before you mentioned about sunlight being able to increase the size of the mitochondria, but you also mentioned about the cold being good. Does it
Yes,
also increase the size of the mitochondria, or does it not?
yes,
So do you take cold showers, for example,
yes, every day.
and it's good for the mitochondria?
Yes.
Hmm.
And also good for my brain because like when the cold, I don't take it in immediately, like open it and
It's
immediately
cold, yeah.
stand in
That's
the cold shower. That's not what I do, by the way, if I'm
that's
being
torture, yeah.
that's pure
Yeah,
torture,
yeah,
right? So I started a little bit warm,
yeah.
okay, but I first warm up a little bit and then I put it in cold mode, right? So full cold mode, that's like, yeah. And what it does is that shock that you get, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like your brain is lighting up, man, you know. And my memory kind of somehow, I think the reason why my memory is functional is because I take cold showers, right? And you'll get used to it, trust me, you'll feel good,
Really?
you'll feel amazingly good.
I actually hate cold showers.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
it's
right.
very, very
But
difficult.
it takes a little bit of guts to start it,
But
right?
then after you start it, you can kind of like get used to it.
Absolutely. You don't have to start with the cold shower, right? You can start with the warm shower,
Mm-hmm.
of course, right? So yeah. Where we were kind of also kind of talking about uh, particle nature of light and the wave nature of light,
Yeah.
right? And I think you asked me a great question, which was like, I mean, how does the entire photoelectric effect, right?
Relate to the size of the antennas.
Yes, I mean, exactly. Right, right. So, just to clarify a little bit there from what is coming up in my mind, yes, whatever antenna size you have, right, that is kind of like proportional to the wavelength. Yeah, like I said, it's inversely proportional to the frequency and directly proportional to the wavelength, right? Because frequency and wavelengths are inversely
Yeah.
proportional. So if it is, if the antenna has to kind of completely absorb that particular frequency, the amount of cycles the wave must do need to have a certain kind of similarity with the size, right? And that is essentially the way how the whole thing gets absorbed, right? So yeah, and the very fact that tying this up with the semiconductor part, right, which I said about solar cells,
Yeah.
Becker was the first person, again, like he kind of found this, that if you have a bone fracture, right, and if essentially what's happening there is that
It's
it
gonna regenerate.
it's going to
Yeah.
regenerate, right? And there is some amount of light therapy involved there, right? So so light therapy is, in my opinion, by the way, because I have benefits from it, I
You
also,
do light therapy actually.
yes.
And what does it consist of?
So let me show you this, maybe. Yeah. All right, so here I have a lamp, right?
Yeah.
And this is exactly what I use in the winter time.
And what type of light is that?
Infrared light.
Infrared light.
Yes, and I just put myself like into this light, right? And once I have exposure of it, like for 15-20 minutes in the morning.
And does it increase the size of the mitochondria?
I mean, that's what I don't know, because I mean, I can't see the mitochondria,
Yeah,
but
so,
what I can experience is I get energy, right?
so whenever you get energy because of light, you can deduce that you increase the size of your mitochondria.
That's
So,
an effect. That's an effect of physics, right? Like I mentioned, because of photoelectric effect and all that
yeah.
kind of jazz that's going on there. So, and we are not sponsored, by the way,
Of
by
course
any of
not.
these kind of vendors. We would love to take some
Yeah.
sponsorships from these vendors, because I think what I was mentioning to you is that light therapy is really going to accelerate, by the way, and it can really, really, really. We have underestimated the power of sunlight. You know, so I think we really have to get a deeper dive into it as human beings.
I think everything we know, the most, like I think I'm one of the most.
I mean, me too, man.
Yeah, like everything we know is kind of basic. Like we mentioned before, what I knew about the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. What I know about sunlight is just they shine and bring light to the world. So I think we need to dive in more in order to get more knowledge of what it really is and how it affects our day-to-day life. And